And good evening. Welcome back to the stream, fellow explorers of space and time. It's good to be back. It's Monday. It's extremely hot, and here I am sitting in front of very, very bright lights next to a computer, which is punching out lots of hot air in a room with a very inadequate ventilation and a slightly sore throat, as you can probably hear. So other than that, everything's peachy. We're all good. We're all good. How are you guys? It's good to be back once more on the stream. It's a bit weird actually. You take a break, you forget entirely how everything works. I was like, what does this button do? How do I switch on the PC? Why isn't the thing working? What is that? That's just middle age probably. Anyway, apologies if my voice conked out. I don't know where my son had a sore throat last week, and I've got it now, and. I don't know how well it's going to work actually. We'll see how it goes. I will do my best. Anyway, it's wonderful to be back. So let's do the thing, because the thing is the thing. Hammer Boo Boo is here. Mad Bonksoft is here. Wintermute GB is here. Of course. Hammer Boo Boo is here again. Too many comments. Nim Duskrin is here. Commander Sodak is here. Commander Terra Glenn is here, which is excellent. Shiny red flag. Yay. Commander Transit Blue. Killy Maglar. Who thinks again? The Shadow Wyvern is here, and Haunted Liv is here as well. Monk says, massive wall of text. Are you the school that, when faced with bad news, prefers to hear that news naked and unvarnished, or are you the ilk that prefers to live in happy and blissful ignorance of the nightmare you're facing? Remember, ignorance every time. Brighton, very cheerily. Congratulations, sir, you've come storming through your medical flying colours. See you next time. Remember, everything's okay then. Absolutely peachy. That's such a good show. Red Dwarf. I'm gonna have to go back. I haven't watched Red Dwarf for years. Actually, I'm gonna have to go back and watch that at some point. But yeah, so for those of you who are not in the UK, we are. Well, I mean, I think most of Europe actually, and it might be elsewhere as well, is suffering from, again, a bit of a heat wave. Well, for us, a bit of a heat wave, and we make a lot of fuss out of it. But I mean, it's a bit dangerous for some people. I think in southern Europe, the temperature is getting quite dangerously high again. Here in the UK, it's not too bad yet, but it's certainly been the hottest day of the year. I think we had 32 degrees centigrade or something today, and they're predicting that this weekend coming is going to be it's going to be very, very hot indeed. So that's going to be interesting. So I'm actually apologies in advance. I'm not going to have a stream on Saturday for those of you who watch my retro stream, because I will be at I'll be at LaveCon, which is going to be interesting. I thought I'd go one last time actually, to sort of, because I haven't seen anybody from LaveCon, and I there's an awful lot of people there I know from a long time ago, and I thought I'd pop along and sort of say hi and flog a few books, ideally, because I haven't been able to flog any books in person for a long time. Well, will I need bodyguards? This is the question I can't answer. I'm taking my son, who's actually now enormous and quite massive, so I'll be absolutely fine. And we're both quite good at Aikido, so we got nothing to worry about. Am I going to be there on Sunday? Yes, we're going to be there both days. So we're going to be getting up early on Saturday morning, driving to wherever it is, which I've got to go and find out because I can't remember. Staying overnight in the hotel, and then we'll be there on Sunday as well. So that should if I get lynched by a rampaging mob of Elite Dangerous fans, you know why. If they're live streaming from they've gone on Saturday afternoon, okay, that's quite good. Well, Mad Monks, do come up and say hello, because obviously you guys know what I look like. If any of you are going, and yeah, because I'll only know you as a name on a piece of text, it's going to be very, very confusing. Or you can just glare at me from across the room and go, I know who you are, but you've no idea who I am. Brave staying going like, well, yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, I'll have a beer or two, but I'm not a big drinker. But I know I have been to LaveCon before, and I know what happens late at night. So it's going to be interesting. So I'm going to be very well behaved. I'm going to stay out of trouble. I'm just the guy in the corner who's flogging a few books. Yeah, don't ask him about Elite Dangerous. Trigger. Don't ask me about the Imperial Courier. Don't ask me about Odyssey. Don't ask me what else don't I like. Somewhere there's a big long list of things I don't like about Elite. Things that David Braben got wrong. Church should publish one day. Anyway, so that's LaveCon. D-Throttle, that was the other one. Oh God, I couldn't stand that. The D-Throttle. There was something else. I've forgotten now. It's been over a year. Can you believe it? It's been over a year since I last played Elite Dangerous, which has gone in a flash. Actually, I mean, I haven't missed it because I had so many other games to play. But it's a year. It popped up on my Facebook memories or something. I'm not playing Elite anymore. Okay, and it was like a year ago. Okay, well there we go. Wow. So don't ask me anything. You can ask me about all the classic Elites. You know, just not the current one. Because it's still a fan of all that kind of good stuff. And still, to be honest, I still like Elite Dangerous. Yeah, just up until Horizons, I'm quite fine with that. It's just what they did after that I wasn't very happy with. But there we go. Yes, Horizons all bugger off. So anyway, that's not what we're talking about tonight. What are we talking about tonight? We are supposed to be talking about, before my voice gives up, we're supposed to be talking about writing. So writing and stuffs. So writing, yeah. So this is world building. World building is kind of one of those things that you have to do for a novel, which is which can be a huge amount of fun, but can also be very, very, very time consuming indeed. It's, I mean, how to describe? I don't think it's on the stream tonight, but one of my good friends, Daddy Hoggy, has admitted to me that for one novel that he never actually finished, he never finished it years and years ago. He did so much world building that he ran out of enthusiasm for actually writing the novel. Which is not the right way around, okay? Far better to finish the novel and not have all the world building done. You can get carried away. And people do. I suppose you could say Tolkien. I mean, we always come back to Tolkien at some point in these streams, don't we? He basically, did loads and loads of world building, and a few books kind of fell out of that process. I think that's probably fair to Tolkien. I think that's the way he kind of did it, because he spent time drawing maps and working out genealogies and working out languages and doing his research and stuff. But then, I'll just write a book to kind of hold it all together, and I might as well publish that. I'm not sure that's quite how it happened, but that's the sort of impression you get from the way Tolkien was. He was much more concerned with the construction of the mythology, it all making sense. Mad Monks have just been watching interesting theories about Tom Bombadil. Haunted Loafers with Tolkien, the novel's just getting away. Yeah, Tom Bombadil is just, I don't know, that was just weird. It would be an interesting thing to see, says Commander, if in general the more world building you do, the less books you write about. I don't know. I mean, I've always viewed world building as you have to do enough to make it make sense. Now, I've had quite a few. I'll get blowing my own trumpet here for a moment. With my Shadewood stuff, is I've had quite a few compliments on. Oh yeah, the world building's really, really good. And it's very structured and it makes sense and it seems logical and it feels like a believable place and all those kind of good things that nice reviews say. Okay, now the world building for Shadewood is quite comprehensive, but it pales into utter insignificance compared to anything that Tolkien would view as acceptable. I mean, I've got one document which is, I think, is it? Let me look it up. It's either 30 or 20,000 words. I can't remember what it is. Let me just go and find out. Okay, I've got the file here. Okay, it's going to tell me in a moment. Don't let it counts. There we go. Actually, no, not even that. 17,000 words. Okay, so the entirety of the world building of Shadewood, 4 books worth, is 17,000 words. 17,710 to be precise. And that appears to have been enough for most people who read the Shadewood saga to go, yeah, it feels like a real place, and the things make sense, and there's clearly some history in the background, and and the world feels real, and the science works, and the characters feel realistic, blah 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 blah. Okay, all that sort of stuff. So I felt like I did enough world building there to make it work. So I got 17. This is pure numbers, right? So 17,710 words was enough world building, i.e., documentation, to create 4 novels, each of 120,000 words each. So on that principle, let's just take one novel. My world building is about is a little more than 10% of the size of the actual novel. Does that help? I don't know if that's a useful statistic or not, but that's basically what I do. So I feel that if I'm writing a series like that, 4 books, it needs to have a fair bit of work done to get there. And I've got I've done 17,000 words, and that generated me nearly 500,000 words of novel, and that seems to have been enough. Now I'm curious. I haven't looked this up in advance. I've just had all these facts to things like I mean, you may think I sit down and plan all these streams really, really rigorously in advance. You might be utterly shocked to know that no, Drew just wings it. Yeah, he does. I have vague ideas, and of course I get distracted. You see, and that's the way. So let me see if I can find the Elite one. How much? There we go. How much world building did I do for Elite by comparison? It's just counting. There we go. Okay, so interesting enough, the world building for my Elite novels was only 10k words. So. In fact, 9,000. There we go. It's updated. 9,571 was the world building I did for Elite. So not as much detail. So the Shadewood is quite a lot more detailed, which kind of makes sense, I suppose. It's a lot bigger. Wintermute GB is not shocked at all. Thank you very much. Glenn says you never went and invented 3 more languages. No, I didn't. No, because I couldn't do that. I can't even speak this one. Yeah, you could argue that Silmarillion was just big world building. So I think you can make a very, very good case that that's exactly what he did. Is Drew Pinky or the Brain? I don't know actually. Which one should I be? I'm probably the Brain. But I did have existing lore to work on in Elite 1. So yeah, I mean, I haven't got the existing Elite lore on an active file on my PC anymore because I've archived it. But there was quite a lot of that stuff there, most of which, to be honest, I didn't use because it was a lot of it was kind of like way too in depth for what I was looking at. So I didn't have to do as much, which is a totally fair observation. But I was only writing 1 book as well, so So I suppose the question is, what sort of things? How much world building do you need? What sort of things should you put in world building? What are the essences of world building? What do you need to know? Well, I think the thing is, it depends. Again, I mean, I say this at the beginning of every stream about writing. It depends. Okay, it always depends. It depends on what you're doing, what you're writing, right? So I'm, this stream's always been about science fiction and fantasy kind of stuff. So let's start with fantasy. In a fantasy world, you kind of have to, okay, well, where are we? Right? Where are we? Are we in medieval Earth? Are we on a sort of parallel kind of fantasy kind of, well, are we in a made-up realm? Where are we? That's the first question you've got to answer about your story. Is where's the story taking place? Is it in a magic kingdom over the rainbow? Where is it? Okay, and you've got to. I think with world building in the fantasy novel, you've got to establish that. Then you've got to figure out, okay, well, what kind of place? What kind of places is the story going to take place in? So are we going to have a? Let's take the cliched fantasy novel. We're going to start in a nice pastoral valley with green rolling hills and a nice stream and some mountains in the background, where everything is sunny and nice and happy, and then the bad stuff suddenly happens, and the omens of woe and the prophecy happen, and we have to undertake some perilous quest out of our pastoral nice area into some ghastly, jagged pointy mountain spikes and places where dragons live and all those kind of things, across the forests of doom and through the plains of despair and the exploding lava rocks of whatever, all those sort of things, right? What is the land that we're traversing, and what zones does it have that we need for our story, and why are they there? And is there any logic to that? I mean, I'm not saying you have to have a degree in geology to make this make sense, because a quick glance at the map of Middle Earth will you'll be looking at that going, I can't quite figure out the geology of this place, but maybe it's been rented. Maybe the landscape has been rent by magic, and you can have anything you like, right? Okay. But you have to decide. Okay, what's the basic landscape? Now, there's a big pitfall here to be warned about. Okay, now I fall into this one because this is this is a place where you can get into all sorts of trouble. Okay, is maps, right? Because maps. Okay, so maps are very, very dangerous objects indeed to a fantasy writer, because you can start, I'm going to create a map. I'm going to create a map of my realm. I think many years ago we did actually create a map live on stream. Because the entire stream to create this utterly pointless map. So you can get sucked into creating a nice map of your realm. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with creating a map. Just be warned that if you find yourself 3 months later going, I'm still working on the map, you might have a problem. You just don't need to spend that much time on the map. Okay. So there we go. Haunted Loaf says, are we in a made-up fantasy world? The question I ask myself regularly. It's not a very good fantasy world, is if it is. Questionable characters, unbelievable plots, physics model extremely limiting, magic virtually non-existent, economic situation untenable, etc, etc, etc. So I don't know if it is a fantasy world. It's a very badly written one. Glenn says, I read the Silmarillion twice, back to back actually, because I still thought I'd get it if I had one pass and then reread it. The Silmarillion, to be honest, I find the Silmarillion a bit like the Bible. I mean, I don't know if any of you have read the Bible, but it feels very similar. I mean, it's a creation myth, obviously, at the beginning, which is, in some ways similar. And then it's just all sorts of legends and people coming in and out of the story, with no preamble, no character development, and then they're gone again. It's just it's sometimes in a few paragraphs. It felt very like an ancient tome that somebody had unearthed and thought, I'm going to publish that. Very strange, the Silmarillion. I mean, bits of it I quite enjoyed. The bit where it becomes more like a history book, like the rings, Sauron and the Numenor, downfall of Numenor, and the rings of the Third Age and all that sort of stuff. And it's but quite hard to read. It's not a book you go, I'm going to read the Silmarillion for fun. It'll be great. It's a nice adventure story. It's not. Okay, just don't get that. So that's weird. But yeah, so you need to going back to the point. You need to start with, okay, well, where are we? Okay, set the boundaries of your story in terms of this kind of geography of the place that you're going to be in. It doesn't, clearly in a fantasy novel, it doesn't need to be anything realistic. It can be, like Terry Pratchett, the world is a disc, okay, which is perched on the back of 4 elephants, which is perched on the back of a turtle, which is flying through space, because that makes sense. But that's okay, because it's a fantasy novel, okay, and then things flow from that. So figure that out, define it, and then you place your characters and your situations in it. And then you can work out, okay, well, they're going to have to cross a river here, and then I can put that into that story. And then, it's quite useful, it's quite comforting, I find, when I'm reading a story, if there is a map, because particularly if it's a fantasy realm which doesn't exist, it's made up, in the sense that I can go, okay, well, the characters have gone across here and they're taking across here. Particularly if there's some time measurements in the story, like several days passed and they arrived at the river, and you go, okay, so I can get a feel for how far that actually is in real life. So stuff like that. so setting roughly what does the place look like. Now you don't have to have a map. I like maps. I prefer to have a map. And Hold Loaves is the quote. Yeah, there are no maps. You can't map a sense of humour. But a nicely done map of a fantasy realm is a fun thing to have in the front or the back of a fantasy book, I think. But I think it's worth you having a map, even if you don't put one in your book, because then you know how things connect and where things are going and how long it takes to be there. And it will help you, if your characters are travelling a certain distance, you kind of, then maybe you need a convenient inn at a certain place, or they encounter a city or sort of stuff like that. And maybe they can see the volcano in the distance, and it just gives a sense of place. So if you create a map, it can be a useful thing, because you can kind of the characters can see that landmark at this point, so it gives them a sense of place, and that will help bring your reader into your world a little bit. So I think it's quite good, quite a good thing to do. Glenn says, I read a sci-fi fantasy that was set here on Earth in the current day, and I was over Google Maps looking up places. The author did a good job of using real world. Yeah, so that's quite fun as well. Or sometimes I've just been rereading Michael Moorcock's Hawk Moon quadrilogy, and that's set in a sort of post-apocalyptic future Europe, where all the names are still kind of there, but they've been changed a little bit. So London has become Londra, and Great Britain has become Grand Britain, and there's places in France and places in Germany and in the Middle East that are all kind of similar, and America has become Amarek. It's quite done. It's quite interesting stuff, and it's just using real geography to sort of allow you to kind of place things, which is quite good fun. So that can work as well, and you can have more than one map. You can have your map, which helps you do that, and you can have the inaccurate map that you provide to the reader to throw them off the scent, as it were. So that's the first bit. The landscape in which they exist. Now, the other thing you may or may not have to do is a little bit about what's going on in the society that your characters are in. Okay, so if they are sitting, the fantasy novel opens and we're in this lovely pastoral valley, and everyone's a happy farmer. And there's plenty of food, and the river's flowing, and people are punting down the river. Okay, well, is there a society here? How does it work? Who are these people? What do they do to earn a living? Are there good guys and bad guys? Who's in charge? How does it work? Is there any money? Is there any is there somebody in charge? How does that organise? Is there any? Do you need any of that detail? You may need some of it. You don't necessarily need all of it, but you may need some of it. What I tend to do, and here's another tip, by the way, is don't wait to write your novel, and don't wait to get the world building done before you start writing your novel, because you'll never ever start. Okay. You can do a certain amount of world building that kind of gets the story going in your head, and then you can fill in the details later. Certainly, I do that. I will every so often I'll come across, as I'm writing, I did this with Shadewood. I suddenly came across this point. I thought, I need some currency, I need some money, and I thought, how does money work? I was like, I'll come back to that. So I just put a big X. What I do is, in my stories, I put XXX, 4 X's in my story for anything I haven't figured out at the time, and I just leave it and keep going. So I don't stop the flow. So at the moment, in my current work in progress, the Higara stuff, I've got a lot of 4 X's, which is actually quite funny, because what the particular problem I haven't, Castlebane 4X, to start the word Castlebane, is I haven't figured out whether I'm going to use made up swear words or kind of modern day real swear words in the story. So at the moment, there's lots of places where the character goes, oh, XXXX, which actually kind of works. And I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, because I've got this kind of rough and ready bunch of people, and they're going to swear, right? But I don't know if I want to use today's swear words or whether I want to make up some new ones, which is fraught with difficulty as well, but that's a totally different topic. It's okay not to have worked out all the details, and leave yourself a marker in the book to basically say, I'll come back here. and figure that out. So for example, Shadewood is a good example. At some point I thought I need some money. It was only a minor scene. I didn't spend too much time. I can't remember exactly where it was, but I remember thinking, I haven't worked out how does money work in this society. I have no idea. I haven't sat down and worked that out. I'll make a note and I will come back to it. So that's quite good. So tetralogy. I don't know. Is it quadrology? Quadrology is a real word. That's good. Excellent. I'm glad I said a real word. Otherwise, it's undermining my credibility, really, aren't I? Drew, says Glenn, do you see plot as separate from world building, or is plot a part of world building? I would say they're separate, because you can world build without telling a story. You can create a fantasy realm and some fantasy history and some fantasy societies and some fantasy politics and some fantasy geology and fantasy stuff without actually telling a story at all. So if you read the Shadewood, my Shadewood world building, there's no story in it. Okay, nothing happens. It's just this is how it is. Okay, so I think world building is more a case of this is how the place. If you were making an encyclopedia of your fantasy realm or your science fiction universe, that's what it would be. It's kind of more an encyclopedia entry, or maybe a Wikipedia kind of summary of the place, as opposed to the actual story that you wanted to tell. So just bleep them. Yeah, I suppose I could do. Thank you for the first time chat, by the way. I've probably just murdered your username. It's virtually unpronounceable, so apologies for that. John Emery says, I have a law against the reporting of swear words. Yeah, so swear words are a tricky one. We should treat that one as a separate topic actually at some point, because it's a difficult one to get right, swear words. Ben says expletive deleted, yeah. We could just enter that in the text. No, so I haven't decided how to treat that one yet, but that's another thing. So yes, but world building to me is, it's what you need to be able to tell the story. Okay, so if your characters live in a tranquil idyll, how does that place work? Or what are people doing there? You may not have to explain exactly how it works in kind of a socio-political context. That's probably too much for many novels. But what is it like there? What lives there? What do they eat? What do people do for a living? Kind of thing. Are they young people? Are there old people? What's the general flavour of the place? And for the various different locales in your story, what's the different kind of do some work so that know the locales. If you're trying to develop something a bit more sophisticated, you may need to have a think about how the world actually works. So if there's one of the things I came across in Lords of Midnight that I just was discussing with Chris at quite some length is I said one of the first questions I asked Chris was, we got this landlocked place, right? So the ice-locked environment, right? Yeah. We've got an ice-locked environment, okay, yeah. So life's going to be pretty tough, right? Because everywhere is covered in snow. So, what do people eat? How do people stay alive when it's an eternal winter? And, I can understand how a few people stay alive, but how do all these massive armies sustain themselves? Okay, because in the game you've got, I think I can't remember, 32 characters, and most of them have got an army of maybe up to 8,000 to 10,000 warriors and riders. Okay, now that's a lot of people to keep fed, right? Especially if they're tromping about having battles and stuff. The supply chains and. You don't want to overthink it. This is important, but some consideration of the fact that there's a lot of people, they need to eat something. Kelly Baglas, I thought you'd jump in with the fish mines. Yeah, an army does march on and stuff and things like that. I had to make reference to the fact that the inhabitants had evolved ways to deal with the fact that stuff was freezing cold and covered in snow most of the time, and there had been massive starvation way back in history when the eternal winter effectively started. Okay, and people remembered that kind of horror. So allude to that in the story. So you don't have to necessarily explain it, because the reader may do that for you based on their own preconception of how things work. But it's sometimes you do have to address some of those things. At least have a think about how it might work. So don't just conjure up things that your reader will go, well, how can that possibly work? I mean, a classic one in fantasy circles is the characters, like I've already mentioned, the characters live in this tranquil idyll. Okay, so so they've got this lovely tranquil idyll, and they're all farmers. Okay, so is there a market? Where does the market? Who runs the market? Is there a government? Yeah, because you can't just be a small farming community in isolation for very long, because somebody else will come along and try and pinch your stuff, right? Is there a standing army that keeps the peace to stop people getting pillaged and stuff from other people? What another thing you find in fantasy novels is there always seems to be a well-paved series of roads connecting everything. It's like, who pays for the roads? Who maintains the roads? Are they paying taxes to somebody? How does all that sort of stuff work? Again, not necessarily to go into all the detail, but just have it in the back of your mind. How does it work? How does it feel? Rajababu 18 first time chat. I have thought about a world, but I think somebody might steal my idea if I share it. Yeah, so keep your specifics to yourself. I mean, I wouldn't share my my world building documents to somebody else in advance of the book itself being written. I might share it afterwards because it's a useful reference and there's nothing else to be gained by it. But yeah, if you're at all worried that somebody will pinch your idea, then don't share it in advance. But it's the techniques, I suppose, we're discussing on the stream. Really, is the sort of stuff that you would probably want to include in your world building. So start off with some geography. Geography, I think, is quite a good one. What does a place like? And then maybe a little bit of the kind of socio-political stuff. Not any huge amount of depth, but if there are a bunch of farmers, is anybody protecting them? If there are magicians in your world, who are they answerable to? What do they do? What's their purpose? Is there a guild of musicians? What's their purpose? Not musicians, sorry, magicians. A guild of musicians. Well, they're there to play some music in the intermediate scenes. Is there a government of this land? How does it work? Is it a feudal system with a lord looking over a bunch of peasants? Is he a good lord? Trial by loot. Who, if there are some roads, who's paying for the roads? Are there toll gates? Some things lead directly to other things, and you don't need to necessarily work out all the details. But if you have your group of adventurers have to go through a toll booth where somebody tries to rip them off by saying, "Oh yeah, well you can't come through unless you give us 2 groats," or whatever it is. It can add a little bit of grittiness, realism maybe to your story that otherwise would not necessarily be there, and your reader will go, "Oh, he's thought of this." Okay, so there's that's how they get their taxes to pay for the roads, because they're ripping people off as they move around the countryside. Little things like that can help. I'm not saying that's one you should definitely use, but if they go for a forest, you don't want to go through the forest late at night because you'll get ambushed by the brigands. Okay, so there are brigands in this environment. Who's supposed to be dealing with the brigands? Oh, well, that would be the army of the High Lord, but he's a bit stretched at the moment, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so what's the flavour of the environment? Who's exercising power? Where is safe? Where is not so safe? What tensions exist in the lives of these people that you're kind of are playing around with? Is it a democracy? Is it a feudal thing? Is it an autocracy? Is it a kingdom? What is it? Okay, who's in charge? How does it work? And is there when we go to the other city. Is that in a different province, a different land? Well, they do things differently over there. Well, I wouldn't go over there because they're that's them. What's different over there to here? Also, have a think about how the economy of a city would work. City doesn't usually just exist for no obvious reason that you need a city there. A city is a crossroads of some major trading routes. So somebody's coming from somewhere to somewhere else, and a city has sprung up at the crossroads, or at a a river delta or a harbour or a natural harbour or something like that, where there's trade with some other land overseas. What's the land overseas? What's coming and going between the ports? What's the reason for the ships to be moving back and forth? Little things like that. If you follow them through, it can help flesh out a novel. I use the 5 whys. I've mentioned this before on stream. If you can answer 5 whys about your thing, you've probably done enough world building. Okay, so there's a city here on the map. Why? Well, it's a major trade route up and down the country between another city and another city. Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so why are they trading? Well, this city down south doesn't have any furs because there aren't enough livestock down there. Okay, why is that? Well, it's really arid countryside. Oh, okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so is there trade up to the north? Well, okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so they're trading furs in. What are they sending it back up? Well, there's lots of, I don't know, there's lots of wood or something. Okay, so they send wood up because they can, and they get furs back. Brilliant. Okay, well, we've got a trade route established. It kind of works. Okay, that's a bit flippant, but you know what I mean. Why does something exist? Go through a little bit of a logical progression to flesh it out, and then just repeat. And then what you'll find is, well, hang on, I've had there's a trading opportunity up there. Those guys could be coming down here. Maybe that would be faster, and they can do it by sea to the other thing. Maybe they get a better price or something. So, and then maybe there's some piracy because there's valuable cargoes going that way, and some other people can sneak around and go. So then you've got reasons for other factions and other politics and other cultures to exist and do things. And if you work out some of those threads, then you're going to have something that feels a bit more alive, feels a bit more kind of lived in, like the world is a real place where there are real priorities, and people are doing things outside of your story, if that makes sense. So you can sense that, okay, well, there's some trade going on with the city up the coast that we'll never go to in the story, but you might overhear in conversation. So, those traders from up north. Outrageous. They charge for their furs, and you could just chuck that into the dialogue of the scene. You may your main characters may never go there, but it just adds a little bit of flavour. And that's a big benefit of world building. Okay, so you just take little nuggets and chuck them into your story just to make the world feel like a real place. So there you go. There was a good bit in Robert Aspin's set of novels which wizards set their bases on ley lines of magic for maximum effect. Okay, so that's a nice idea, is that there's some hidden mechanisms in the geography of the landscape maybe that allow you to increase power and all those kind of bits and pieces. So if you can add those things in at the world building stage, you can then reference them into the story. Now what you can do there is, with the writer in the world building, know exactly how it works. Okay. What you can do in the writing of the story is that the characters don't necessarily know the thing that you know in the world building, but they figure it out as the story goes on. And so the reader also doesn't know how this stuff works initially, and then they get little clues as to, every time we do the magic over this spot, it just seems to be much more powerful. Why is that? And then they slowly put 2 and 2 together, and the reader has the opportunity to put 2 and 2 together as well. Guided by your original world building document that describes it in detail. So a lot of the stuff that's in your world building will not make it into the story. Okay, just won't, because you can't use all of it. But little bits of it will season the story in quite a good way. So there we go. Andy Weir's second book, Artemis, did some fun backstory about the economy and resources in the moon colony. So so that stuff is good. You may never use it, but you occasionally it will it will do stuff. And having a whole bunch of things about how the society got there and what condition it's in and where it's going is also another thing as well. Chris says, something I've been trying to nail down with my current main project. I mean, trade is such a big part of it, so what are the trade routes and what trade goods and where do they go? Yeah, so if trade is a big deal, you've got to have a reason, a trade environment that makes sense. Do people barter? Is there a currency? Or who regulates that currency? whose currency is it? How do you trade things for that currency in a remote location? Do they accept that currency in other parts of the realm, or whatever it happens to be? How widespread is the currency? Or are we back to bartering again? All those little details can kind of add in. Well, yeah, of course we could take these down to Town B, but they don't accept groats in Town B. We're going to have to trade it direct for food stuff, but we won't get a good price for it. So you can do those kind of things and build those sort of stuff into thing. Piracy is a classic one. To be a pirate, you're running a lot of risk. Because you could die quite a lot because people don't really want you pinching their stuff. So any pirate has got to have a really good reason for intercepting trade. It's got to be really, really valuable, somewhere where they can get to and flog it without getting into trouble. So you need to work out the dynamics of how do you make money as a pirate. It's got to be worth your while to put yourself in danger all the time. It's got to be lucrative, beyond the normal kind of trading mechanism. But you've also got to have not too many pirates to traders, because if the piracy overwhelms the traders, then everybody's out of business, right? So you've got to have a balance. How much piracy can the traders afford, and vice versa? And are people running protection rackets and things like that? All that sort of stuff. That is the detail that you can slowly expand out from your initial premise. I've got this exact same thing with my current thing. Is there is trade between systems. So what is going to be on one system that the other system can't produce locally, and vice versa? What makes it worth sending a spacecraft loaded with stuff from one place to the other? What is it that makes that transition worth doing? What is the trade route, and how subject to change is that trade route? The things that so working out some of that detail will make your novel much more consistent and believable. And I suppose that goes for that goes for anything. It doesn't have to be a novel. It makes sense for a film, or it makes sense for a TV series. It makes sense for a computer game. Having all the background nailed down a bit just makes things feel a bit more believable, and that's an important part of the kind of immersion. Are we allowed to say that word? Haunted left furiously taking notes. Well, the funny thing is, they did in the olden days, 10 years ago now. They had some very, very strict rules on their law, but not anymore. So there we go. Rajabubu, let me share about a world I thought of writing about. I thought the world where only women exist and men can't be born. How would it function? Would wars take place? Would nations exist? How would they develop science? Would history look like? And would politics be the same? Well, those are big questions to ask about such a world. I don't know the answer to that one, Rajabubu, but I did address something similar in my Shaber novels. In those novels, we have a matriarchy, really, really powerful matriarchy, where the women have special powers and the men don't. So the men are very much second-class citizens, and the women basically decide. They're in charge of the politics. They have the power over everything. What does that world look like? That's what I explored. In many ways, it was exactly the same as a male-dominated world, just different people in charge. But you can explore things like that in those kind of things, you can examine and answer those questions. So those questions that you're asking are exactly the sort of things that the novel should explore, and the answers we find as readers and writers by going through that exact process. Don't know what the answers are, but you can decide to write that story and tell us what you think the answers are. I think that would be an excellent book to read. I'd look forward to that one. Chris says, as I say, better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Yeah. So I think if to give an example of where you don't have world building is when your characters will suddenly come across a palace in the middle of nowhere which is fully staffed with lots and lots of servants, and there's it's like, well, how does that palace get its food? Where does the food come from? There's no farm nearby. There's no obvious power generation. There's nothing serving the palace. It's fully stocked in the middle of nowhere. So how does that work? I mean, you could just say it's magic, right? But that's a bit of a cop out. Places don't exist without a reason for being there. And if you only have a a citadel or a palace or a farm or whatever it happens to be, simply for the purposes of so the movie can happen, or the story can continue. You haven't done enough world building. You need to have a bit more. Why is there a palace there? Is it on the way to somewhere? Is it on the edge of a terrain? Is it in the center of a place? Because it's got to have resources. It's got to have a reason to exist, other than you're telling a story at that point in time. Okay, so if the thing that you're describing only exists because you need it to be in your story, you haven't done enough world building, or at least you haven't finished your world building yet. That palace should exist before your story starts, because it clearly hasn't just been built, and it's going to exist afterwards. So after your characters have gone from the place, what does it do then? You don't need to go into the detail of what it does, but it needs to have a purpose. It needs to have a continuance of its own, outside the fact that your characters have just wandered through. I mean, a good example in the real world is like a train station. Okay, train stations exist because trains come and go from those train stations, and they take passengers to places. If you set yourself a story in, I don't know, Cannon Street train station in central London, and they have a romantic meet up there, and and then tearful goodbyes. That's all very nice, but Cannon Street station exists afterwards and before. Okay, and that's the places in your story will be the same. The cities that your characters go through existed long before your characters ever went there, and should have their own story of some kind. Okay, now you don't need to do the detail, but acknowledge the fact that they have to be places. And you may want to spend a bit of time, and Tolkien did a lot of this, for example, you may want to spend a bit of time. Okay, well, the provinces as they exist in my fantasy realm today, maybe 20 years ago, politically the place wasn't the same. So maybe there's been some wars, or maybe some things have, become destitute. Maybe some power structures have collapsed. Maybe there's been a war of attrition and stuff. What is the potted high level political history of the land? Is there rising tension between two different factions? Is everything at peace? Was there a great war 100 years ago that the old people still talk about? What is the feel of the place? Okay, if you can add things like that into your world building, your characters can come across and go, I just met this really old guy who's just saying, this he just says the situation is the same as it was 50 years ago. What happened 50 years ago? Oh, there was a war between the X's and the Y's. What's there? What happened? Well, the Y's won. Why do you think this has all been burnt down and never got fixed? Oh, okay, yeah. And so you can have your characters can have conversations like that, utilizing your world building. Now, you may have worked out the precise numbers of people who lived and died, and you don't necessarily need to do all that. But again, being able to drop little things like that into the conversations that your characters have makes your world feel like a real place, a much more structured place, a place that has its own sort of history. Now, if you want to spend your time working some of that history out, you can. Now, I do personally tend to do that. Okay, is I write a little bit of history of the place. I mean, I've been known to do a timeline of major events, and I don't know. Have I got? I don't think I've got a. Let me just see if I've got a timeline. And like I said, it doesn't need to be detailed. Let me just go and have a look here. I've got a feeling I might have made a timeline. There we are. It's your real timeline. So it's pretty simple. Okay. Key events. Let me see if I can shrink them up. For some bizarre reason, my copy of Excel has gone like ridiculously large. What's it doing now? Stop binging at me. Right, here we go. I'm just going to full screen it, and then we'll just drop it across here for a moment. Okay, so apologies for this for a moment. There we go. Let me get this so you can actually read it. So this is a timeline for. So it's a small spoilers if you haven't read this book, but and this is basically it. This is all the detail I did for the timeline for Shadewood. Okay, so I've got an Azurio date and an Earth date. So this is the planet where the Shadewood series takes place. This is the Earth date. Okay, and basically climate change tipping point, 2025, just so everybody's aware, right? 3 years from now, climate change tipping point is reached in the Drew Wager future. Society stress happens. I didn't put a date on that. I've put in World War III here, interesting enough, in the year 2080. I mean, to what you it's fantasy, right? Muon catalyzed fusion has been developed by 2082. Asteroid pulled into Earth's orbit 2084. Death of biosphere confirmed some point in between these. Construction of the generation of ships begin in the year 2205. First gen ship leaves Earth in 2269. You know, I'm making up the future. Okay, that's what I do. And then eventually we get to the Du Maurier, which is the ship that goes to Azurio. Leaves Earth in 2289 and arrives 600 years later or so, in the year 2921 Earth time, which is negative 22 for the Azurio date, because I've counted year 0 on Azurio as basically the point where they started colonising the planet with the first generation of settlers, which is actually the year 2943, which is year 0 on Azurio, and then we kind of travel into the future, and there are significant events across the Azurio thing, which are referenced in the stories, and then you can see the Earth date and the date that is used in the chapter headings. If you remember in Chainwood, there's a chapter date for they're not called years, they're called rounds in on Azurio, but it's a similar kind of concept. And so round 2306, where stuff happens, right? Did the ship name get mentioned? Yes, it did. Yeah, it's in the last book. It's in the last book. So, you know, there's not huge amounts of detail there. There's just a couple of notes. Small spoilers there. Kiri killed. But yeah, that book's been out for ages now, so I'm pretty happy with that. You know, Caesar and Elizabeth communications are separated. That was an important thing for me to work out when that was. And some of these dates I did refer to in the story once I'd calculated what they were. So, and that's all the information I needed. Okay. That's all the information I needed in order to tell the story. Those are the only dates I required. Now I've done the much more sophisticated one for my current thing because I need to include those dates in with a whole bunch of other things. So I have done that too. So again, you don't need too much information. That's a very, very simple timeline with some, just a few kind of notes just to work out roughly when things are happening and when major events are going on. You can do a lot more detail, absolutely, for sure. You can do a lot more detail, but you don't need to. You don't need to. Additionally, on the maps, so I ended up with quite a sophisticated map of the Shadewood planet because I felt I needed one, but I didn't initially do that. So if I look at let me have a look at the map. Is that the original map? There we go. No. Where is the map? Okay, so yeah, here we go. Let me go back to the thing. So this is the map that I ended up creating. Okay, so this one was created with a piece of software, and it's got all sorts of detail on it, and it's got markings and various other bits and pieces. This is the map that's referred to in the story. But it's not the original map that I started writing the book with. Okay, so I worked this out over time. This is actually the kind of the I suppose the official map that I ended up with of what the planet actually looks like and how it works. So that's what that looks like. Now, by contrast, my original map was hand drawn. I think I'm just trying to find out what I did with it. There we go. So this is my original map. This is not quite so impressive, but I hand drew it, okay, because I needed to kind of work out a few things, and this is basically what I ended up. Key locations, still marked roughly where they ended up. An island, some much smaller islands. I'd worked out how this latitude longitude system was going to work in my head, but I hadn't kind of codifying it. And other than that, it was a main continent. An edge of the map beyond which you can't go, and that's about as far as I got. So compare and contrast that, obviously, again, with the map that I eventually created when I did add in a lot more detail. You can see I developed it quite a bit between the two kind of variations, but it's essentially the same. I mean, here are those major locations. They're still there. Here's the island with the the cities and various other places, but I had to fill in a little bit more detail. And there's a whole bunch of lands here. So, for example, in the 4 books that I wrote, they kind of one of them starts up here and moves to there. One of them starts from here and moves across to here. One starts from here and kind of moves that way. And then they spend a lot of time. They do go up here at one point, and then they come down. They go to here. They do venture in to here as well. But all these lands down here have been unvisited by the stories. So all the extra detail I put in here, and there's, to be honest, not a vast amount of detail that I needed to put in. It's effectively unexplored, but it's there. At some point, I might want to go back and write some other stuff. So maybe I can. So sometimes you will generate a lot more stuff than you actually need. And the trick is, I think, to be careful that you don't generate too much. You don't spend I've spent 3 years doing the world building for my amazing novel, and I haven't yet created it. So there we go. World War III will probably be a bit sooner than the way things go. I know. I mean, every time I write something kind of post-apocalyptic, it gets worse in real life. Like faster than I can write the made-up history of the world. It's like, this isn't good. Wintermute says World War III has already started. Well, you could be right there as well. So who knows where history's going, right? Drew is pretty happy with killing Kiri. Oh, poor old Kiri. She was one of my favourite characters, actually. I did like Kiri. Kill your darling, somebody says, isn't it? As a writer, you've got total power of the lives of your characters. I have had, to be fair, even more so now, actually, than Salome. I've had quite, when Salome got killed, in the way that she did, there was a fair bit of angst directed at me. But I've now had, I counted them up actually not that long ago, and I've now had more comments, emails, reviews, however you kind of work it, about the fact that Kiri died, and the fact that you made me cry when I was reading your book, which is actually quite a good thing when you're an author. Bursting into tears and getting quite upset about things, about her as a character, than any other character I've ever had. So people like to like her or like to hate her, depending on which perspective you're coming from. She's one of those polarising characters, which I think is quite good fun. So yeah, poor old Kiri. I had a lot of fun, as an aside, I had a lot of fun writing her character because she starts off as somebody you're sympathetic to, quite by design, and characterization we talked about a little bit, quite by design. Your design, I was trying to get you to go, oh, poor old Kiri, in the first few chapters of the first few books, she's had a hard life, she's just not having any luck, she's trying, bless her. But she takes decisions after that based on what she thinks and what she's experienced that turn her into quite a hard and unpleasant individual. Okay, so she becomes quite tough, and she becomes quite impatient, and she becomes quite bitter, and she becomes quite brutal. She just, that's the way of the world. Live or die. Right, so I'm going to be hard and brutal, and so she becomes hard and brutal to the point where she suppresses her more natural, empathetic side entirely, and thinks nothing of whacking people around the head with a stick and killing them, quite mercilessly. And she actually begins to enjoy the process of torturing people and things like that. So she becomes somebody you don't like, okay? And so halfway through the series, you're kind of going, no, I don't like Kiri anymore. She's horrible. But at least you know why she's like that, so you can kind of see how she's got there. And then, of course, towards the end, she changes again. And she tries to undo some of the damage she's done, and gets misunderstood as to her motives for doing such things, which causes her a lot of pain and angst and various other bits and pieces. So they're trying to design characters like that, who basically you're not. Am I rooting for this person or not? It's quite good fun. Chris said she elicited different emotional responses. So sometimes, I'm deliberately as a writer trying to make you second guess yourself. The characters that I write are not uniformly good. They're not uniformly bad. And they make mistakes in terms of the sort of people they are and the actions they do, and then they sometimes come to regret those mistakes, and then sometimes they can either wallow in the things that they've done, or they can try and do something about it. So what they try and do is based on the kind of person they are. The other character I found very fascinating to write, and I've had some feedback on her actually, was the character of Zoella, who starts off quite a soft and quite pleasant, empathetic sort of person, and then gets consumed by hatred that kind of gets out of control. She actually has a bit of a mental breakdown as a result of it, and trying to write a compelling, believable mental breakdown of an individual, it was actually quite a challenge. Fortunate is not the right word, but I've been able to observe people who've gone through that process of having serious mental health problems, sometimes having recovered from them, and I simplified it a lot for the sake of storytelling. But the process that I observed in people, I was able to use as a guide to how Zoella would go into the breakdown, and then with support come back out of it again. And writing things like that is quite an interesting thing to explore the human frailty to mental illness and all those kind of things. So it's all good fun. Trying to construct characters that are believable and that you kind of think, I'm not quite sure whether this is the good guy or the bad guy, and the idea being that you don't know either way, because people aren't good guys and bad guys, they're just people. At least I think so. And those are the kind of characters I tend to try and write. Haunted Life. Would I recommend Wonderdraft? Wonderdraft's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's the most intuitive piece of software, but its pricing, where because I don't know about you guys, but I hate subscription models. I won't buy anything on subscription if I can't. I like to buy things outright and it's mine. Okay, I know you only license software, blah 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 blah, etc. But I just want to buy it. Okay, I don't want to keep paying you money to use a thing. I just want to buy it and then go away. Leave me alone. All right. So Wonderdraft allows you to buy it. That was the big things for me versus most of the other mapping things, which are subscription based. I just don't like subscriptions. Is it the best one? Is it the most easy to use? No, it's not. But it's capable, and it's fairly straightforward to use once you practice it a bit. So that I would say sort of 7 out of 10. I've seen better, but all the ones that are better than it have subscription licensing, which is an absolute no from my perspective. Your mileage may vary, as they say. So if you're happy with subscriptions, then go knock yourself out. But I don't like them. Wintermute says Julia May started with one novel as a background for a story she wanted to tell, which became a quadrilogy and a companion guide to the quadrilogy. She wrote the story she initially wanted to tell in a further 4 books. So that is almost something that I've done. I think Glenn, Commander Terra Firma, and I were talking about this the other day on Facebook. Is that the short story that I wrote for our 9 Streams of Consciousness, which is Glenn's cue for dropping the URL in the chat once more. See how I set that up, Glenn? That was good, wasn't it? The story I wrote there is kind of a set up for the prequel series that I want to write about Shadewood. It's not the same universe. It's not the same character, but it's kind of how I imagine that kind of beginning to be fleshed out. So it's entirely sensible to write a story which is a precursor or an explanation or a set piece for what's coming up next. Drew told me to put the link in your head. We have this thing going, see. So if you haven't read that, why haven't you read it? Get that and buy it immediately. 9 Streams of Consciousness, by the way, the link that Glenn's put in there was the book that we wrote on this stream a few years ago. We actually collaborated, several of us, on this stream to create a book from first principles and published it. So that was the thing. and many of the authors are still with us even now after all those years. So yeah, that, that's the commercial break done. Back to your scheduled programming. Yeah, but yeah, that's a perfectly valid thing to do, and I've done that in the past. I mean, Shadewood was a story that was quite a long time in development. Some of them are still trolling the stream, yeah. And I can show you a book which is one of my old elite stories. Okay, so I wrote a short story called Ascension, which is in here. That one, I think. Let's have a look. So this one. Notice some Shadewoody things. Okay, there's a red dwarf star and various other bits and pieces. So this is dated from a long time before Shadewood, and it's kind of based on a computer game, right? Elite, long before Elite Dangerous was a thing. Now, interesting enough, look at the character names here. Okay, so it was Miri and Maru. Okay, so not quite Kiri, but yeah, that's slightly different. Names that I've already used, and this is a story I actually used as my critique for my own editing, which we did a few weeks ago. But this story, if you read the entire thing, you'll notice has a lot of Shadewoody things in it. It's kind of like my, it's like it's the egg or the seed of Shadewood, maybe. You can see that I was in the process of developing my ideas for Shadewood, but I haven't actually got there. Interesting enough, by the way, today is in fact Shadewood Day. So I looked in my my Facebook history today, and today was the day I went off on a dog walk in 2000, and I think it was 2009 or 2010. And I posted on Facebook that day, basically saying I've just had this really good idea for a series of novels. I didn't have the name for it by then, it was obviously struck me enough that I made a little Facebook post about it. It's just popped up on my timeline of things I did all those years ago. So yes, today is International Shadewood Day, anniversary of the burst of inspiration that I had to create the Shadewood series. So it's, and sometimes you say inspiration can strike like that. Just boom. There's an idea. Right, I've got the idea of it. So yeah, today is Shadewood Day, which is quite funny. But back to the world building. Okay, so we talked about geography. You talk about social political stuff. You also need to do some of the kind of environment of the place. Now, an awful lot of fantasy novels seem to take place in a in a kind of medievally kind of a landscape, which is very European. Dare I say it? So you've got nice rolling hills, a few lakes, a few rivers. There's apples on the trees. There's grass in the fields. There's meadows of flowers. There's a few mountains in the distance, but nothing too strenuous. And it's all very familiar. Okay, all very familiar. But a fantasy realm doesn't have to be like that. You can have totally different environments. You could have anti-gravity mountains and floating rocks like they do in No Man's Sky, things like that. It could be a very different environment to the one that we're used to in the real world. So if you're going to have a fantasy realm with floating rocks or floating cities suspended in the clouds, whatever it is that you want to have in your world, make some notes about what they are, and you don't have to explain how they work necessarily, but do they? How do you get to, if there's a floating city in the clouds? How do you get up there? Why is it there? Why would you make a floating city in the clouds? Is there some major reason? It's off the ground because it keeps it safe from being attacked. Perfectly valid reason for having a floating city, right? Who lives up there? Is it just the posh people? The kind of Elysium thing. Is there a stratified society where all the peasants live on the ground and do the farming, and then the rich people live in the cloud cities? How does it work? What's the point of it being there? All those kind of questions. And if things are different, i.e., you do have different creatures, and you do have different plants, and you do have different landscapes, make some notes. Okay, so again in Shadewood, I didn't want to have normal creatures, so I invented a whole bunch of creatures and a whole bunch of plants. Now, mostly they're kind of plot specific points, so you could argue they're not hugely well developed. What I had is basically I need something analogous to a horse, so I came up with a herg. Okay, what's a herg like? Well, it's kind of like the cross between a horse and a cow. It's sturdier than a horse, but it's not as fast as a horse. But it's a bit like a buffalo, really, I suppose, a herg. In my head, I've also got some flying reptiles because flying reptiles are cool, right? And some of the people can ride them, so that gives them fast transport around. That's quite a useful thing to have in the story. There are some insects which come in quite useful. There's a wolf-like creature as well called a cane, or a Khan, I think it was. No, it's a Khan. There's a strange stuff that lives in the swamp and tries to kill you by eating you alive. That's nice. The plants also try and eat you, either by kind of ingesting you from dropping from above, or kind of snaring you in tendrils and things like that. Okay, so basically there's weird, dangerous creatures that are not quite the same as the creatures on Earth. Okay, they're different, and I had to go into some description of what they're like, which kind of ecological niches do they fill, how they work. Some prefer cold, some prefer hot, and I also went into a little bit of the biology, because I was in Shadewood. I was on a planet that's not the same as the Earth. It's tidally locked. There is no day-night cycle, so the creatures don't need to sleep. So they've never evolved the need to sleep. They also have 3 eyes rather than 2, because one eye is able to detect ultraviolet radiation, which is bad, so they get underground the moment they detect it. So they've got 3 eyes, and the humans only have 2, which is an early clue to the reader that actually maybe the humans aren't native to this place. Those sort of ideas, okay? Flying reptiles and people who ride them, dragon riders. See, I was trying to avoid dragons per se, but it's flying reptiles. Yeah, okay. They're dragon-like. There's no doubt about it, but they don't breathe fire in my particular example. Nor can these ones actually talk. So most of the creatures on Azurio are sentient, but they're not sapient. But that's my thing. You design what you want your creatures to be able to do, but make the creatures kind of make sense. Okay, so if you've got flying reptiles, what do they eat? Okay. So I basically had a kind of niche. Okay, so I had right down the bottom, I had some things called marsups, which is a simplification of marsupial. That's where I got that from, marsups. And then hergs are kind of a beast of burden. Marsups are food. Marsups eat the insects. Marsups are food for some of the bigger creatures. The hergs are pretty much vegetarian, so they just eat the grass. The reptiles like to eat the marsups. The canar, the Khans, the sort of dog-like creatures, will eat the marsups as well. There's also a felin, which is feline, so it's a kind of cat-like creature. So there's a sort of hierarchy of things, and there was one big creature, which I can't remember its name now, which is kind of like an elephant, but not a really, really large beast that you could use for moving things. It's kind of I think a cross between an elephant and a giraffe is how I imagined it. And that was just a big creature that they tended to use in battle in some of the places. So things like that just allow you to have creatures. And if you're going to design a bunch of creatures, kind of see if you can make them fit into some sort of ecological order where one would eat the other naturally. Because otherwise, why do they exist on this planet? They don't just exist in a vacuum. That sort of stuff. So things like that are. Again, will make sense to your readers. Okay, so the flying reptiles, their natural form, they would predate the lower forms, and those things would predate something else, and etc. etc. As for the plants, if the plants make their living of eating things that wander into their traps, like a Venus flytrap. All those sorts of space whales exist in a vacuum. I suppose they do. I've never been all that convinced about big creatures living in space. It doesn't seem like a very logical thing to occur. I mean, just wondering what sort of evolutionary pressures or processes can exist to allow a creature to live in the back. I mean, it's not impossible, I suppose, but it must be pretty tricky. to sustain your bulk, I suppose, the very small amount of matter that comes your way in space. I don't know, whether the possibility of big corporeal space creatures actually is realistic or not, but certainly they exist on the ground. We know that, so you can have lots of fun. But it's worth working out how your animals and plants work. Okay, so what do the animals eat? What needs do they have in terms of sustenance? How far can they fly? How far can they run? How many of them are there? Which areas do they live in? Are they a pest? Are they useful? Are they a nuisance? Are they indifferent? All those kind of things. Again, and as your characters encounter said creatures, you can use them as a bit of drama, which is what I did with. There's two particular plants that my characters encounter. One of which is like a lurking thing that naturally sits high in the undergrowth of the forest canopy, and basically has these tendrils that are virtually invisible. And if you bump into one of them, the tendril coils itself rapidly around you and stings you, paralyzes you, and makes you numb. And then the other ones basically come down as well, and then basically you're slowly hoisted up into this plant. It kind of just dissolves you and eats you. So that's a nice way to go. Sort of a Venus flytrap, but for people, basically. There was but it's based on a real plant. Okay, so and sometimes going for a real plant is a good thing to do. There's a plant, actually, some of you will know this, called where is it? I think it's called a pitcher plant. And obviously it doesn't eat humans in the real world. This one here, there's a nice picture of it there. That one, and the pitcher plant basically is if you're an insect and you get to the edge of it and you wander in, then it's basically it literally is a slippery slope to the doom, and you fall in there and you drown. Okay, if you're an insect. Okay, now. I've always been fascinated by plants that take on animals, basically, or insects, and obviously you all know about a Venus flytrap as well. So in Azurio, what I decided was that I'd have plants that were effectively carnivorous, but they would be quite capable of going after big prey like small animals and human beings. So there are two plants in the Shadewood universe where that happens. One of them nearly kills our main character Maru at one point because traps him and tries to eat him, and the other one is a funny scene actually, which is kind of like the pitcher plant but much bigger. So it entices you in with this sort of honey-like substance. So I think it's in book 4, and Kiri and Maru are wandering through this forest, and they kind of get this strange tangy smell in the air, which is just intoxicatingly nice. And they find this flower, and then they start scooping out the pollen and nectar rather in the middle of the flower, and it tastes amazing. It's like I don't know, honey or something nice like that. And this stuff, whilst it tastes nice, is also intoxicating. So they get drunk really fast on this sort of stuff, and of course then that has its own fun and games as they're getting drunk, mucking about with each other, doing what young people do when they get drunk. And but of course it's a trap, and the plant basically closes up and tries to eat them, which is all good fun. So you can use things like that as as a way to put your characters in some jeopardy. And I don't know if you can hear those birds. They've all gone completely bananas outside the window. Sounds like a bunch of seagulls. I've suddenly decided to have a conflab about something. So things like that. Okay, your plants and your animals can be a source of interest in the world as well, and make your readers very kind of attached to your place as a place that they like to. A really good example of this actually is the film Avatar from a few years ago. So I remember reading at the time, a lot of people went to watch the movie not so much for the story, which is entirely utterly predictable, basically space Pocahontas, certainly not for the kind of battle scenes and all that sort of thing, but to kind of just appreciate the weird flora and fauna that was presented in that film, and they just loved being in the cinema, enjoying that world. Okay, just being there on the planet, and had those. And there's you can find them on YouTube. There are cuts of the Avatar film where it's basically just the nice bits, the nature environment, on a kind of endless loop for hours and hours and hours. So people can just enjoy the idea of being on this wacky, weird, but very, very beautiful planet. Okay, and that is something I think is worth aiming at in your writing. If you can create a world that's so alluring, and to the reader, go, oh, this is such a nice place, just want to hang out here for a bit and enjoy it. I think that's a good thing. Okay, if you can make your world that compelling, it's a good thing. And flying reptiles there as well. So maybe that's the thing. Flying reptiles are crucial for success. So maps. So a bit of history, a bit of socio-political stuff, the flora and the fauna, what actually happens there, a set of dates. Okay, that kind of allow you to structure various bits and pieces. Maybe some kings and queens. Maybe significant events. The other thing I tend to put, the one last thing I tend to put in the world building is a bit of what happened just before the story that you're about to tell happened. Okay, so what precipitated the real story? Okay, so in the last 20 years before the story happened, what happened? That makes sense. So in terms of Shadewood, there's a whole bunch of prehistory that I wrote and in some detail, because I wanted to work out that in quite some specifics, because the characters discover it as part of the story. So because my plot required that the characters uncover the historical nature of the place that they were living in, I had to know what that was before I could write the story, because otherwise they're going to understand. If I'm uncovering a piece of history that I haven't actually written, it's not going to work well. It's going to be piecemeal and probably not all that satisfying, and maybe I'll contradict myself and get things wrong. So that won't do. So I wrote down what had happened prior to my story starting, before I wrote the story that I actually ended up writing. So there's a very short, reasonably detailed, but not like super detailed, prehistory of the environment, which basically explains massive spoilers if it came to a reader, but it's only for the benefit of me, the writer, it basically defines what happened, so that my characters can then uncover that history as part of the main story. And I needed to do that to make it work. So if there are significant things that have occurred just before your story starts, make a note of them, work them out. Maybe there was a big war, maybe there was an earthquake, maybe there was a volcano erupted, whatever it happens to be. Maybe the king died and there hasn't been a successor, and it's fallen into conflict between two opposing brothers or something. Anything like that is useful stuff to have prior to your story starting. So your characters are going, oh yeah, well, remember back in the good old days when we still had a king, right? They can make comments like that, and it makes sense because there is some history for them to be referring back to. Glenn Scribble's note: always include flying reptiles. Flying reptiles are very good. Tune in, tune out, drop out, watch Avatar. It's kind of like that, isn't it? Yeah. Nothing like dragons at all. No. Dragons are a thing. Flying reptiles are fun, right? But I was. Even then I was beginning to think, okay, well, hang on a minute, flying reptiles. Could you sit on the back of a flying reptile? How big would the reptile have to be able to support the weight of a rider? And the answer to that is not necessarily all that big. It has to be a fairly strong animal, but it's certainly not within the bounds of ability that you couldn't fly on the reptile. But for the sake of some scientific convenience, I lowered the gravity slightly on my world in order to make it much more plausible that you could fly on a reptile. So that's quite good. Haunted Love says the defunct online game Extra Solar had
photobionts and motobionts instead of plants and animals to emphasise the species were only roughly comparable. That's quite a nice idea, quite like that. So again, depending on where your imagination takes you and how different you want the world to feel to here, if you want to make a really sharp contrast between an alien world and the Earth for the sake of description, I think that's a good thing to do if you can come up with some sensible scientific sounding sort of names. Select81, good evening and welcome back. Thank you very much. Good to be here. And I think if we go into science fiction rather than fantasy for a moment, you've got a whole bunch of other stuff in there. So you're going to have spaceships, okay? You're going to have technologies. You're going to have weapons. You have those in fantasy though, but it tends to be more technically focused, particularly around spaceships. You're going to have the travel mechanisms in science fiction. How do they work? Where do they get the power from? How long have they been around? Are there better versions coming? Is there an old version that's still used but isn't as good as the current version? What kind of weapons? How do the weapons work? What sort of level of hard science fiction are you going through, or is it space fantasy? How does stuff work in this universe? Do we have shields? Do we have anti-gravity? Do we have teleportation? All of those things. In your universe, your personal universe in which you're writing, what are the rules? And I think it's a good idea to settle as many of the rules as you can in advance and then write, because then you can go, they can't use a teleporter because there aren't any. Okay, otherwise we would definitely use one to get us out of this jam, but we haven't got a teleporter, so it's the escape pod it is. Etc., etc., etc. How do the spaceships work? Do they have infinite fuel? Do they have limited fuel? In which case, that's going to determine how they operate. The same things about space piracy and trading and markets and ports and places to go with your spaceship apply exactly the same way. Why is there a space station there? Why would somebody build a space station there? It's because it's a trade route between somewhere and somewhere else. It's a stop-off point. It's a refueling point. It's a place to get provisions. Where do those provisions come from? Well, that's from incoming ships. Okay, so there's a trade route there, right? Okay, and you start building it out. It's the same sort of stuff. It's exactly the same sort of process. Places don't exist without a context for existing. And I think that's the most important piece. And the spaceship has got to have a reason. A spaceship is a big, expensive thing, right? So even I try to think of spaceships as a bit like what we in the UK would have as, I don't know if this translates well into other countries, but what we in the UK would call a white van man. Okay, so it's a guy, a small business, a handful of staff, not a huge amount of takeover, but basically drives around the countryside doing stuff in a small van. Okay, right? It's a white van man. You might have owner operator big rigs, but they'd have the one rig. Okay, the 14-wheeler or the 18-wheeler. Moving cargo about. That's what they do. Okay, and the white van man would have a smaller set of things and a bunch of tools in the back to do odd jobs, whatever it happens to be that they specialise in. Right? They're going around doing jobs. All right, and in space there are places to go and jobs to do, and your spaceship is your van. Okay, so it's not a pretty spaceship. It's a utilitarian spaceship. It's there to do a job. Okay, you don't spend any money on this spaceship unless you have to until it's busted. Okay, so we'll fix that flux capacitor, whatever it is, next time we get to a port. Oh no, it's gone bang. All those little dynamics you can kind of chuck in. But the spaceship has got a reason to be going. So okay, we need to pick up some supplies because we've got a job to deliver some XYZs, but we need to get some fuel first, otherwise we're not going to make it to the final destination. Okay, all this cargo that we're transporting is a half-life. If we don't get it there in 3 days, then it's only worth half the amount of money, so we've got to get it there in 3 days. Okay, so work in things like that to make the trade, make the ships have a reason for the way they work, and the reason they've got to go to somewhere, and how does the trade work? All those kind of things, very, very, very important. Did they previously have a system for moving fast and light within the star system, but expectedly stopped using it one day? Yeah. Make it make sense, okay? So, just technology is very disruptive. I mean, to use an elite one, for example, I mean, a classic one that they didn't address in the law, which, again, was a bit of a disappointment, is prior to, when the original Elite game, when the Elite Dangerous started, it was the year 3300, okay, 3300. They just invented this brand new hyperspace technology called the frameshift drive. Okay, that's how the game starts. That's fine. That's all good. New technology. Blah blah blah. New game. Prior to that, though, they had what was then, they had a previous generation of hyperdrive capability. Okay, so they still had interstellar travel, but it took, in the law, a week to make a hyperspace jump. Okay, and you had this technology called the Star Dreamer, which basically kind of made time speed up from your perspective, so you could kind of deal with it. Otherwise, you'd be really, really bored. So it took you a week to jump using hyperspace between star systems, and then it would take you another week to travel from the place you jumped in, which was a long, long way out of the solar system, towards the middle of the solar system. Okay, so in order to move from one star to basically one space station to another space station, was an elapsed time of about 2 weeks. Okay, and that's how the Elite universe was before Elite Dangerous. Okay, that's just how it was. That's how it worked. Okay, so trade would be okay. Well, hang on. Okay, we're going to run out of bananas in 2 months. Well, you better get a ship soon, right? Because that's a 4 week turnaround. If we want some more bananas, get some bananas scheduled now. Okay, because it would take the ship a month to make the return voyage, right? Okay, to get the space bananas. Now, in the year 3300, frameshift drive is invented. Okay, here's a wonderful new method of crossing vast interstellar distances without all that tedious mucking about in hyperspace. No, that's a different level. But what happens then is, and it's a game. I get it's a game. I know it's a game. It's a game. But observation, right? You can now go from system to system in half an hour. Okay. Or probably less, maybe 10 minutes, who knows? Yeah, because not only have you got a super duper fast hyperspace drive, you've also got a super duper fast in-system mechanism called the frameshift drive, which gets you from where you hyperspace into your planet in a few minutes. Okay, now that is going to utterly dramatically change the way that trade works between star systems, right? Because suddenly everything is just in time. Okay, we need some bananas. Well, let me just ring up my guy. Can we have some bananas? Yeah, I'll be there in half an hour. Okay, it's just to run to the supermarket now, rather than a mission to China. Not just in trade, but in military, military deployment. If it took you previously a month to assemble a space armada and go and blockade a system, then that's a logistics thing you'd have to organise. If you can suddenly now hyperspace a bunch of military vessels into a star system and boom, there you are there at overworld forth without any notice, it's going to change your military strategy quite a bit. So there's a thing. And then also exploration. Suddenly, 1,000 light year voyage prior to the introduction of this technology is a big deal because it's going to take you months. Okay, you've got to keep the crew fed. You've got to keep the ship running. Okay, a voyage of thousands of light years is going to be a major undertaking. Suddenly, you can get to the centre of the galaxy in a couple of hours. Okay, that's going to change stuff. Okay, if you're going to do that sort of thing, have a think about what those effects might be. You can't keep things static. One thing I remember thinking that was so bizarre about Elite Dangerous was when the power play stuff was invented is like, hang on, we've got spaceships that now can travel thousands of light years in a few hours, and yet all these superpowers are basically concentrated in a very, very small bubble, arguing about a finite set of resources when there's this entire galaxy around them which is uninhabited and full of resources. Why don't they just go out and get what they want rather than arguing about stuff in the middle? Doesn't make any sense, at least not to me. If you're going to do dramatic things, and maybe some of those things were thought about, but there's no evidence of it now. But you know what I mean? A video game also always has to be a game first, clearly. But in a book or a film, I think you need to be even more. You have to be a lot more careful about the fact that, hang on, if they've got this super duper fast quantum, pulse drive, hyperdrive thing, why don't they just go there rather than all this faffing about? Because they can now, because they did that in the previous chapter. So have a think about the implications of changing the technology dramatically, because it will completely undo things. The invention of the motor car. One of the big things in the UK. We had a amazing infrastructure to do with canals in the UK in the 18th century. And then obviously in the 19th century, late 18th, 19th century, along comes the train. Okay, boom, canals totally pointless because they're superseded and no longer used. Okay, so all the canals fell into disrepair. Train runs really, really well. Okay, totally, allows us to have the Industrial Revolution, the British Empire, huzzah, etc. Okay, we're the first ones with all that in the entire world. And then what happened, apart from the big world wars, brushing that aside for a moment, technology-wise, the car. Okay, in the 1930s and 40s, the UK had this amazing network of train connections, branch lines, main lines going everywhere up and down the country. Most of it's gone. Most of it's gone in the UK now because the car replaced it. And all the small lines, all the small branch lines were no longer economic to run because of this new technology coming in. The motor car and the personal transport that the motor car enabled took out the train, apart from the big main lines. And so those branch lines, you can still see them in the UK. Some of them have been restored, but a few of them, and they still operate as kind of charitable things and hobbyist things. But loads of places in the UK you can encounter strangely straight valleys, which aren't natural valleys at all. They're the old train lines. And the rails are long gone, but the cutting still exists, covered in greenery and stuff. And it's a legacy of something that used to be a massive industry and it's just disappeared. Okay, because of some new technologies come along and replaced it. So not sure the British Empire was huzzah for everyone. No, it wasn't at all. No, I'm using that very, very flippantly. But it's an example. If a new piece of technology comes along, I mean, for example, if tomorrow teleportation was invented, who would want a car, right? Or an airplane, or a bus, or a train, or anything? It'll be gone instantly. Okay, because what's the point? All the infrastructure that we created for the car, the train, the airplanes would all be gone as well because you don't need it anymore. And technologies will come along and be incredibly disruptive to the environment, the planet. On the previous set of technology that everyone's made their living on and understands. And a sea change can happen really, really fast. I mean, we're facing one of those at the moment, obviously, with the introduction of electric cars and the slow demise of internal combustion engine cars. We've been so used to, because we've had internal combustion engines for like 100 years, we're so used to that being mainstream. It's been taking a while to challenge that, but new technology is coming along and replacing it. It's inevitable. It's just going to be different. You drew cheaper parts for your goal. Yeah. But you know my point. If a new piece of technology comes along that is so much more superior than the old one, people will migrate straight away. The old thing, I don't know if it's apocryphal, but the old thing that Henry Ford said, if people had asked me what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. But he didn't give them faster horses, he gave them a motor car. And then, people today have horses for fun. Nobody really not in the Western world, and it not really uses horses as transport anymore because a car is an awful lot more convenient than a horse, right? And in the future we won't be using cars because there'll be something else that's way more convenient, and the car will just be that's it. You remember the 20th century, the 21st century? Has teleportation been invented and suppressed by the oil companies? Who knows? I mean, maybe it has. It's going to be the same thing with power sources and all those other things. New technology will always come along and have an impact and replace existing things. And it's worth, in your novel, in your world building, going, okay, is the current technological state static or not? Now, I had a view in the Shapewood novels again that they were on the cusp of rediscovering technology that they had long lost, and so actually post Shadewood in the I think, and I haven't written it down, but in the decades post the Shadewood novels, the world that I created would have gone through some pretty bad turmoil as people came to grips with huge influxes of new technology that they just simply weren't prepared for. Because here is a culture that is mostly feudal, where suddenly there is high technology in the form of flying machines and transport and things that presumably would become much more widely available once people understood how it all worked, which would totally change the culture of the planet. very, very quickly. That means conflict, that means inequality, that means all those other things. So it would be quite an interesting time to write about. I haven't done that. That's just an observation on me as to what would happen after my stories are finished. That sort of stuff would occur. So it's quite interesting to sort of have a look, and it's worth having a think in your stories about how does the timeline of those sort of things change. Has it been static for a while? Why has it stayed static? If it has, is there something about to come around the corner that's going to completely change the way everything works? And then if somebody is aware of the fact that something is coming, then some smart people can make money out of it, or can take advantage of it, put themselves in positions of power to control that technology, or like John Emery just said, maybe actually this new technology, we don't want that coming out. We don't want that. That's going to, if we allow that to come out, everyone's going to have the power to do what they want. We can't have that. We're the people in charge. We've got to keep charge. Okay, that technology is being suppressed, right? Opportunity for conspiracy theories. Insert one here, but all of those things are grist for your mill as a writer. Is there somebody controlling it or not, etc., etc., etc. John Emery, the X universe, there's some interesting new technologies that come and go through. So if there's been a bit of thinking about that, the reader of your novel will go, this is really interesting that this world seems to be quite dynamic. The author has thought about how it's going to work, where it's going to go, what happened before. That makes for a much more compelling reading experience, a much more mature writing experience as well, I think. Give you something that will be much more compelling for your reader in the future. So there you go, world building. There we go. I hope that has been useful, my friend. So anyway, I'll wrap this one up now. But so Thursday will be No Man's Sky. Friday will be Star Citizen. Saturday will not be a retro stream, I'm afraid, because I will be at LaveCon. So any of you who are going to LaveCon, I'm almost certain I won't gate crash the Frontier live stream. That would be a bit mean, wouldn't it? Maybe I'll just hold up a banner at the back saying, what happened to the law? Wait. I'll be very well behaved. But the temptation would be there. But so if you are going to be at LaveCon, do come up and see me. I shall be wearing the trademark hat, so I'll be easy to spot. But yes, and then obviously back next week. There will be some interruptions, I'm afraid, to the Saturday schedule for the next week, because LaveCon is next week, and the weekend after that I think I've got a golf meet that I'm going to my son with. The weekend after that is my wife's birthday, so you might have to excuse me on that one. So yes, I'm not quite sure when the next retro stream is going to be, because July has turned out to be incredibly busy, so it may even get pushed into August, I'm afraid. So apologies for that, but that's real life doing its thing. A lot of events, and I certainly can't miss my wife's birthday for a stream. That would be very bad. I'd probably be dead, which would finish off the retro streams forever. So I'll let you know about the details. So there might be, I think a few things being a bit erratic for the next month or so. But we'll get on the case, and there'll be interruptions, but we'll be back. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, my friends, be good. Take care. I hope that's been useful. Always write on. Keep writing. Never stop writing. Never stop thinking up new ideas and new places to go and things to see. She can watch it. Happy birthday, wife. Dear, not sure that's going to kind of pass muster somehow, I think. Anyway, take care, my friends. Be good. See you soon, and see you on Thursday. Take care. Bye now.